Shwmai, Geraint dwi, a dwi'n mynd I ddweud stori wrthoch chi. My name is Geraint and I'm going to tell you a story. Dyma stori Ogof Craig y Ddinas. This is the story of the cave in Craig y Ddinas. Now, a long, long time ago, before you were born, before I was born, even before your teachers were born. Yes, it was that long ago. A long, long time ago, there was a young man who lived in Pont Nedd Fechan. Pont Nedd Fechan, a little village in the shadow of the great grey Brecon Beacons. The Brecon Beacons, Banau Brycheiniog, where you can still see Cadair Arthur, Arthur's chair, the saddle between Penafan and Corndy, where the Brenin Arthur, King Arthur, Lord of the Welsh, would sit and look over his domains. And many other hills and mountains besides, Fan Gehirich and Fan Fawr and Fan Nedd and Cefen Ciel, they march on and on from west to east. There by Pont Nedd Fechan is the grey limestone slab of Craig y Ddinas, rearing up by the river. And the river Nedd Fechan, the river Neath, flows down past the town of Neath and down to the sea. Now, this young man we talked about, we're going to call him Rhys. Now, he had a job, a very important job. He was a porthmon. He was a drover. These were the men that drove the black and red and white and brown cattle of Wales from our hills all the way to be sold in the markets of England. This was before the days of cars and lorries and trains and trucks, you know. Rhys, he'd walk, he had to walk. He would drive his herds of noisy lowing cattle, his cows and calves from Pont Nedd Fechan, from the Brecon Beacons, to sell at busy, bustling Smithfield Market in London. He'd sleep beneath the stars, or beneath a hedge, or even, and if he was heading down the valley and it had been raining, which it sometimes does, near Pont Nedd Fechan, almost beneath the Neath. And then Rhys, having sold his cattle, would walk home again. He'd bring the farmers their money, and of course, when he brought the farmers their money, they complained about the prices they got, because some things never change. So, before setting out on a long, difficult, possibly dangerous journey with dozens of obstreperous cattle, what does a drover need? He needs a stout stick, a stick to help him walk those hills, a stick to help him ford the streams and rivers, a stick to keep those cattle moving forward out of Mrs. Jones's front garden, a stick to fight off thieves and cattle rustlers that the Cymry, the Welsh, would meet along the way. Every drover needs a stick, and Rhys always got his stick from the same place. He would climb up to the top of Craig y Ddinas, all the way to the top, where they say the Tylwyth Teg, the fairies, dance on moonlit nights, but that's another story. Anyway, at the top of Craig y Ddinas, there in the grey-green Brecon Beacons, there was a bushy brown hazel tree, and he would select a perfect stick, a beautiful brown stick, straight and stout and ready for whatever would arise. He'd take his billock, and with one deft chop, he'd separate the stick from its root, and then he'd trim it, and he was ready for the way to London and the perils in between. Incidentally, what's brown and sticky? A stick. Anyway, Rhys had made that journey many a time, since he was a youngster, indeed, and he did it once again with his stick from Craig y Ddinas. He wasn't alone. He made sure he had mates to help him with the droving, and he always had a corgi with him, a corgi, a little dog with short legs that could nip at the heels of those cows and stay out of the way of those dangerous swishing horns. And so to Smithfield at last, and he sold his cattle. He hid those few pieces of gold that he'd made in a battered old purse, a leather purse. He said farewell to his mates, and he went to celebrate in his favourite tavern near London Bridge. He was happy. He was on his own for the first time in weeks. And now his world was going to change. It was going to change forever. Nothing would ever be the same again for Rhys. Rhys sat down in our tavern and he was contented. He was eating his rich yellow cheese and his brown bread. He couldn't afford the white bread. That was for posh people. And of course he had a pint of foaming brown ale to wash it down with. He should have felt happy. His job was done. He'd got a good price, although he knew the farmers back home would complain. But he felt odd, he felt strange, he felt uneasy. Something was wrong, and then he knew why. There was a man, an old man with a long grey beard, and he was wearing a long grey coat, and he had long yellow teeth. Heavy. This was before the days of Colgate, mind. And that old man was looking at Rhys. He was staring at him carefully, intently. And he got up, that old man, and he walked over, and he stood above Rhys. And he spoke. And he spoke to Rhys in his own language, in Cymraeg, in Welsh. And he said, "If you can tell me where you found that stick, that brown battered hazel stick beside you, I will make you rich. I will make you rich beyond your wildest, widest imaginings. Tell me where you found that stick. Rhaid I ti ddweud wrtho I. Tell me where you got that stick from." No, this was odd. This was unusual. This hadn't happened before, and our hero didn't trust that old man with his grey coat and his staring eyes and his stained yellow fangs. But they talked. Money talks. That's why. The idea of money talks a lot. Very eloquently, very cleverly, very convincingly. And yes, they did set out for Rhys's home together. That old man and Rhys. Back to Brecon, back to Craig y Ddinas. For Rhys had realised that his new companion knew things that other people did not know. Ordinary people didn't know what that man knew. He was what we in Cymru and Wales call a dyn hysbys. In England they call him a cunning man. A man who's no stranger to mystery or to magic. There, in the shadow of the great grey-green Brecon Beacons, they climbed up the steep, slippery grey sides of Craig y Ddinas. There was the scrubby, shrubby brown hazel tree, and there Rhys dug. And there was a wide grey flat stone, and a ring was embedded into it, a red, rusty old ring, which squeaked and it squealed as the cunning man and Rhys puffed and panted as they pulled it clear of where it had lain. And underneath there was blackness. A deep, a dark, dangerous blackness, wind in their face. They lit a lantern. No electric head torches then, of course. They lit their lantern, a faint, feeble flame flickering within, and they set off into the unknown. There were more shadows than light, than illumination. Down and down, deeper and deeper into the mountain, deeper into the darkness. The darkness was pressing in on them. That feeble lantern light seemed to diminish, to grow dim, weak, wan, puny, paltry, that fragile flame. Cobwebs in their hair, and they had spiders in their eyes. There were bats swooping and swishing past their ears in that narrow tunnel, and then it opened out. They could feel space around them. And there, at the end of the tunnel, they saw a sight no one had seen for 1,000 years. There was a cavern, there was a cave, and there were men. There were soldiers, there were warriors. Their armour, it was ancient, it was antique, old-fashioned. They had no guns by their sides, but they had silver swords like deadly biting serpents, spears to stab, axes to slash and to hew, great round shields to shelter behind. And in the middle, a man lay, a tall man, with the most splendid armour encrusted with green emeralds and with red rubies, with a golden crown on his head. And there was an almost silent whispering of breath around them. Those warriors, they lived, they were still alive, they breathed, but they slept very deeply. And there, by that crowned warrior, by that king, there were great piles of gold. A glistening, glittering yellow pile of gold with a dark all around. And between the cunning man and Rhys and that gold, there was a bell. Now Rhys, he saw that gold and he started to rush towards it, but the cunning man grabbed his arm. He said, "Nah, bide, stop. Go no further. You must not touch that bell. Don't touch the bell." Rhys was startled. What's going on here? "If you touch that bell, those sleepers will wake. If they wake, they will ask you, "A ddaeth y dydd eto, has the day come?" And if they ask you that, you must say, "Na, cysgwch mlaen, the day has not come yet." "All right," said Rhys, "but I'm not going to touch the bell, am I? Let me have that gold." And towards the gold he went. He rushed. He hastened his way over there, past those sleeping warriors. Greedily he started to fill his sack. More sensibly now, the cunning man, the Dyn hysbys, picked his way through the sleeping warriors. And he kneeled down too. Slowly, sensibly, he filled his moderate sack. It wasn't too big. Rhys pushed more and more gold into his. He could hardly lift the thing. They picked up that lantern with its dim light and they set off into the blackness again. And they got outside safely. It was dark outside when they emerged from that tunnel, but it was a healthier darkness, a safer darkness than that dangerous tunnel under Craig y Ddinas. The cunning man, well, he turned on his heel. Off he went. Away from Craig y Ddinas and away from our story. And we can assume that he lived happily ever after. But Rhys, well, Rhys bach, he'd never had so much money before in his life. He didn't know what to do with it. It was the high life for Rhys now. He bought the black horse because he liked the colour, and then he thought, oh, I'd quite like a grey horse as well. I've got the money, so he bought the grey horse. A big orange brick house, very posh. And he had servants. Never had servants before. He was the one who did the running around in his previous life. So with his big house, he had big kitchens. Food and drink. Well, what was he going to eat? What was he going to drink? Well, what would you most like to eat and drink? You'd probably want chips, wouldn't you? You'd want crisps, jelly and ice cream, pizza and chicken tikka with half and half. You'd probably want to wash it down with lemonade and Coca-Cola and bubble gum flavour pop that turns your tongue a curious shade of blue. Well, poor old Rhys, he didn't have those options available to him. None of those things had reached Wales yet. But he did well for himself. He had rich pink hams and brown rounds of beef, white bread and golden honey, wine red as blood or pale as moonlight over the River Nedd. He had been fit and strong before. A walker, a runner, a worker. Now he was a sitter down, he was a guzzler, a gulper, and boy did he put on those pounds. He became big, he became fat, he became pretty enormous. And soon he became broke. He spent every golden coin, every penny. What to do? He'd enjoyed himself at old Rhys. What was he going to do? Well, the answer was obvious. You've answered it yourself already, haven't you? He had to go back to Craig y Ddinas. So back he went to Portnewydd Fechan, and he puffed and panted up those grey sides to Craig y Ddinas. Oof, it was a lot harder work now. And he dug down, and he puffed and panted again as he lifted that old rusted orange iron ring. And down he went into the tunnel with his lantern down to the bell. That tunnel seemed narrower somehow. Well, anyway, he squeezed his way down the tunnel. He filled a bag, a big bag, a much bigger bag than the one he'd had before. He picked it up. It was huge. It was heavy. It was awkward. And then he thought, I spent all the money I had before. I'll put a little bit more gold in. And so he did. He stuffed some more gold into that sack. He could hardly lift it. That brown leather sack filled with that gold dragged him down. He puffed to the tunnel entrance. He squeezed past that bell. Don't touch the bell. Don't touch the bell. He squeezed past that bell. Woof! He'd gone past it. But then, that last piece of gold that he'd stuffed into his sack, it just fell. It fell. And Rhys, he tried to catch it. And as he did, he brushed against that bell. Well, if he did. How was it possible that such a massive sound could reverberate from such a small bell? It echoed throughout that chamber, throughout that cave, throughout that cavern. And Rhys didn't know what to do. As he looked, as he watched, he saw those sleepers awake. Swords and spears are flourished. The king sits up and looks around him. Everywhere there are shouts, Adath y dydd, as the day come. Is it our time to awake? Rhys, he was flustered, he was confused. What was he going to say? What was the words? What? The knight's closing on him. Their swords are drawn, their spears are levelled. They shout, "Da ddaeth y dydd, da ddaeth y dydd." Everything goes black, beaten, battered he was, black and blue in the faint light of the moon on top of Craig y Ddinas. Even his bruises had bruises. His clothes were torn and his nose was broken. There was a trickle of bright red blood down his cheek. There was an ache in his back. There was thudding in his head, but at least he was alive. Boy Spach, I'll never do that again, he thought. I've been stupid and greedy. Why did I need to take so much gold? I could have lived for years and years and years on a small sack full of that. Right, now then, I'm going to go down. I'm going to bring up a small bag of gold. I'm going to be sensible, I am. I'm not going to waste. I'm going to live frugally and eke it out. I won't waste my money. Last time down for me now, said Rhys to himself. Lawr a ti, trola, last time. So up he goes to the hazel tree, does Rhys. Up he goes to that hazel tree and he finds his spade. It was still up there. And down he digs. Down to the flat stone. There was no flat stone. Well, he'd had a clout on his head and he thought, oh, my wits must be fuddled and befuddled. Oh, there's another hazel bush. It must have been that one. So he panted his way over to that hazel bush and down he dug, but there was no flat stone. Well, there's quite a few hazel bushes on top of Craig y Ddinas, and Rhys dug holes under every one of them on that long moonlit night. Never again could he find that stone. Never again could he find the tunnel. Never again could he go down to see those sleeping soldiers and their king. So back he went to the droving life, sleeping under the stars, to London and back. And I can tell you, he was a lot poorer than he had been, but he was a lot fitter. And I think he was a lot happier. And still, that king and his warriors sleep on. And who is he? That king with a golden crown who sleeps in Ogof Craig y Ddinas. Well, the Brenin Arthur, King Arthur, of course. And he sleeps there still.